I never thought hatred could taste like copper pennies and old shame until I heard his name again. My mother's voice cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. Grayson Morrow has agreed to the arrangement. She smoothed her skirt with hands that had once painted watercolors, back when we had money for such luxuries. The wedding is in 3 months. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers. It shattered against the kitchen floor, brown liquid spreading across white tile like a stain I'd never be able to scrub clean. But the sound barely registered. All I could hear was that name echoing in my skull, Grayson Morrow, like a prayer I'd forgotten I knew. Did you say Morrow? My voice came out smaller than intended. The biotechnology CEO. My father looked up from his newspaper, eyes bright with the first hope I'd seen there in months. His company's worth $800 million. This marriage will save us, Callum. The debt, the bankruptcy proceedings, all of it gone. $800 million. Our family owed $60,000. I pressed my palms against the counter until my knuckles went white. The boy I'd loved at 17 had grown into an empire. The boy who'd whispered promises against my throat had become the kind of man who could buy and sell human lives with a signature. I won't do it. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. My mother's face hardened into the mask she'd perfected over years of social climbing and financial ruin. You will. This family's reputation depends on it. She stepped over the broken ceramic, her heels clicking against the floor with military precision. Unless you'd prefer to see your father in prison for embezzlement. The threat landed like a fist to the stomach. I'd always known about the missing client funds, the creative accounting that had kept us afloat for the past 2 years. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that squeezed the air from my lungs. He wouldn't. The statute of limitations runs out in 6 months. My father folded his newspaper with deliberate care. If this marriage happens, certain records might disappear. Permanently. I stared at him across the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a child, where we'd celebrated birthdays when celebrations still felt possible. This man had taught me to ride a bicycle. He'd bandaged my scraped knees and told me bedtime stories about brave Omega princes who saved themselves. Now he was selling me to save his own skin. Does he know? The question slipped out before I could stop it. About us, I mean. About before. My mother's expression sharpened. Before what? But I couldn't answer. The memories felt like broken glass in my throat. Sharp edges of summer afternoons and stolen kisses, of promises made in the dark that had crumbled to dust by morning. Grayson had vanished from my life without explanation when I was 17. One day he was there, the next he was gone, leaving nothing behind but the echo of his absence. I'd spent 9 years learning how to hate him for it. The ceremony is at the Meridian Hotel. My mother's voice pulled me back to the present. Small affair. Just family and business associates. How civilized. She ignored the sarcasm. You'll move into his estate immediately after the wedding. He's already prepared a studio space for your art. The way she said the word made it sound like a childhood hobby I should have outgrown. I bent down and began collecting the broken pieces of the mug. Each shard was a memory I'd have to carry forward. The weight of old love turned to newer, sharper things. The ceramic cut my palm, drawing a thin line of blood. I need time to think. Time is a luxury we don't have. My father's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd run out of options. The contracts are being drawn up today. I stood up slowly, cradling the broken pieces in my bleeding hand. Outside, rain began to fall against the kitchen window, each drop like a countdown to my execution. 3 months until I became Mrs. Grayson Morrow. 3 months until I had to stand across from the man who'd taught me that love was just another word for abandonment, and promised to honor him until death did us part. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd already died once because of Grayson Morrow. Now I'd have to marry his ghost. The house looked like a mausoleum built for the living. I stood in the marble foyer 3 days after the ceremony, suitcase in one hand and the remnants of my dignity in the other. Everything gleamed with the kind of sterile perfection that money could buy but warmth never touched. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings like frozen tears. Grayson emerged from a doorway to my left, moving with the measured precision of a man who'd learned to control every gesture. He'd grown taller since 17, broader through the shoulders, but his eyes remained the same winter gray I remembered. Except now they looked at me like I was a stranger. Your studio is upstairs. Second door on the right. He didn't offer to carry my bag. Mrs. Chun will show you around tomorrow. She manages the household. How thoughtful. I set my suitcase down harder than necessary. The sound echoed through the foyer like a gunshot. He watched me with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. There are rules. No guests without prior approval. No access to my office or the basement level. Dinner is served at 7 if you choose to join me. And if I choose not to, then you don't. The conversation died there, suffocated by the weight of everything we weren't saying. 9 years of silence stretched between us like a chasm that no amount of forced civility could bridge. He turned to leave, then paused. The studio has north-facing windows. I remembered you always preferred natural light. The words hit me like ice water. He remembered. But before I could respond, he was gone, his footsteps disappearing down a hallway that seemed to swallow sound. I stood alone in that pristine foyer, surrounded by the kind of luxury that felt more like a cage than a home. The studio, when I found it, was perfect. Too perfect. North-facing windows filled the room with soft, even light. An easel stood in the center, brand new and expensive. Art supplies lined built-in shelves, oils, watercolors, charcoals, everything I could possibly need. It was like walking into a catalog spread titled, How to Keep Your Omega Wife Occupied. But something felt wrong. Familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I ran my fingers along the windowsill and came away with dust that shouldn't have been there in a house this meticulously maintained. The floorboards creaked under my feet in a pattern that seemed almost musical, as if I'd walked this room before. In the closet, I found a box of old notebooks. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. The handwriting was mine. I recognized the loops and slashes that had barely changed since high school. But I didn't remember writing any of it. Day 23, he brought me tea again this morning. Earl Grey with honey, the way I like it. Sometimes I think he knows me better than I know myself. The pages were filled with observations, sketches, fragments of what looked like a life I'd never lived. A life in this house, in this room, with this man. The dates went back 2 years. I dropped the notebook like it had caught fire. It landed open to a page covered in drawings of a man's hands. Long fingers, a scar across the left knuckle that I somehow knew came from a childhood accident involving a broken bottle. Grayson's hands. Christ. The word came out as a whisper. I shoved the notebooks back into the closet and slammed the door. But the damage was done. Questions multiplied in my mind like cancer cells, malignant and unstoppable. When had I drawn those sketches? Why couldn't I remember being in this house before? And why did the smell of Earl Grey tea make my chest tight with something that felt dangerously close to longing? That night at dinner, I sat across from my husband and studied his face like a map to a country I'd forgotten how to navigate. He ate in silence, cutting his steak with surgical precision. Have I been here before? The question slipped out between the salad course and the main. He looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. Something flickered behind those winter eyes, surprise, maybe, or fear. No, he said finally. This is your first time in my home. But the way he said it, careful and controlled, made it sound like a lie wrapped in truth. That night I dreamed of hands I knew too well drawing secrets across my skin. The dream started 3 days after I found the notebooks. Not the usual kind, shapeless anxieties that dissolved with morning coffee. These were surgical in their precision, cutting through my sleep with images that felt more like memories than imagination. A kitchen with yellow walls. Hands braiding my hair. The sound of rain against windows I'd never seen. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat that tasted like fear. The house seemed different in daylight, as if the shadows had rearranged themselves while I slept. I found myself walking halls with the confidence of familiarity, turning left toward the kitchen before I remembered I'd never learned the layout. My feet knew where the floorboards creaked. My hands reached for light switches in the dark without hesitation. You seem tired. Grayson's voice cut through my morning fog like a scalpel. I looked up from my untouched breakfast. He stood in the doorway, dressed for another day of corporate conquest, but his eyes held something that might have been concern. Strange dreams. About what? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I couldn't name. I wanted to tell him about the yellow kitchen, about the feeling that I'd walked these halls before. But something in his expression warned me off. Nothing important. He nodded, but his fingers tightened around his coffee cup. Mrs. Chen mentioned you've been wandering at night. I wasn't aware I needed permission to explore my own home. You don't. His voice softened in a way that made my chest tight. I just worry about you falling down the stairs in the dark. Worry. The word felt foreign coming from him, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. After he left for work, I found myself drawn back to the studio. The morning light revealed details I'd missed before. Scratches on the hardwood floor that spelled out half-finished words, paint stains on the windowsill that matched colors I'd never used. But it was the mirror that broke me. Hanging on the far wall, it reflected nothing unusual. Just me, pale and confused, surrounded by the tools of my trade. But when I moved closer, something shifted in the reflection. For just a moment, I saw myself pregnant, belly round with life, hands protective over the curve. I blinked and the image was gone. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, heart hammering against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The mirror showed only my shocked face now, but the phantom weight of pregnancy lingered in my body like an echo. Impossible. The word came out as a whisper. Omegas could only conceive during heat cycles. I hadn't had a proper heat in years. Something about stress and trauma disrupting the natural rhythms. The doctors had told my parents it was probably permanent. Yet something deep in my body remembered the weight of life growing inside me. I pressed my palms against my flat stomach and tried to rationalize the sensation away. Stress. Lack of sleep. The mind playing tricks after too many days in this house that felt like a memory palace built from dreams I'd never had. But when I closed my eyes, I could feel phantom kicks against my palm. That evening, I cornered Mrs. Chun in the kitchen. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. How long has Grayson lived here? 5 years, sir. She continued chopping vegetables with mechanical precision. Has he ever had other companions? Her knife paused mid-slice. I'm not sure I understand the question. Guests who stayed long-term. Someone who might have used the studio. The studio was built for you, sir. Mr. Morrow had it installed last year when the engagement was announced. Last year. But the notebooks went back 2 years. Are you certain? No one else has ever. Quite certain. She resumed chopping, but her movements had grown tenser. Will there be anything else? I wanted to press further, but something in her demeanor warned me off. Mrs. Chun knew more than she was saying. In this house of secrets, she was another locked door. That night, I dreamed of ultrasound images and a voice that sounded like Grayson's whispering promises to someone who felt like me but couldn't be me. I woke with tears on my cheeks and the absolute certainty that I was losing my mind. The dog appeared on a Tuesday, morning like an answer to a question I hadn't known how to ask. I found him sitting by the front gate, golden fur matted with rain and eyes the color of amber honey. He was medium-sized, some mix of retriever and determination, with the kind of intelligent face that suggested he understood more than most humans. When he saw me, his tail began to wag. Hey there. I approached slowly, hands open and non-threatening. You lost. He stood and trotted toward me with the confidence of familiarity, as if he'd walked this path before. When he reached me, he sat and offered his paw, a gesture so polite it made me laugh despite the growing unease that had become my constant companion. Well, aren't you a gentleman? I looked around for an owner, but the street was empty. No desperate flyers stapled to telephone poles, no frantic calls echoing through the morning air. Just this dog, looking at me like I was the answer to his prayers. I can't keep you. I knelt down and scratched behind his ears. This isn't my house. Not really. But something in his eyes made the words feel like a lie. When Grayson came home that evening, he found us both in the living room. I'd spent the day trying to convince myself to call animal control, but every time I reached for the phone, the dog would rest his head on my knee with such profound trust that my resolve crumbled. Whose dog? Grayson's voice carried its usual careful neutrality. Stray. He was waiting by the gate this morning. Grayson studied the animal with the same clinical attention he gave everything else. The dog, for his part, tilted his head and stared back with unwavering focus. Then something extraordinary happened. The dog walked over to Grayson and sat at his feet, looking up with what could only be described as recognition. Grayson's composure cracked for just a moment. His hand trembled as he reached down to pet the golden head. What's his name? His voice came out rougher than usual. I don't know. He doesn't have a collar. Charlie. The word slipped out before Grayson could stop it. He looks like a Charlie. The dog's entire body began to wiggle with joy at the sound of the name. He jumped up, front paws on Grayson's chest, tail whipping back and forth like a metronome set to pure happiness. Jesus. Grayson caught the dog's paws, steadying them both. Okay, Charlie. I remember. Remember. The word hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications. Remember what? My voice came out sharper than intended. Grayson looked at me over Charlie's head, and for a moment, his mask slipped completely. What I saw underneath made my breath catch. Grief so profound it seemed to have its own gravity. Nothing. He gently pushed Charlie down. He reminds me of a dog I used to know. But Charlie wasn't having it. He trotted back to me, then to Grayson, then to me again, as if he were trying to connect 2 points that had somehow become separated. He can stay. Grayson's voice was barely above a whisper. If you want him to. That night, Charlie slept on the rug beside my bed. But sometime in the dark hours before dawn, I woke to find him gone. I searched the house, calling his name in whispered urgency, until I found him in the hallway outside Grayson's room. He was sitting perfectly still, staring at the closed door like a sentinel, keeping watch over secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. When he saw me, he whined softly, a sound filled with such profound sadness that it brought tears to my eyes. What is it, boy? What do you know that we don't? But Charlie just looked at me with those amber eyes and wagged his tail once, as if to say, patience. Some truths take time to surface. The nausea hit me 3 weeks after Charlie's arrival, swift and merciless as a blade between the ribs. I barely made it to the bathroom before my stomach emptied itself with violent efficiency. The porcelain was cold against my palms as I knelt there, gasping and shaking, while Charlie whined from the doorway with the kind of concern usually reserved for family. Food poisoning, I told my reflection in the bathroom mirror. That sushi place downtown was always questionable. But even as I said it, something deeper than instinct was already whispering the truth I wasn't ready to hear. The symptoms accumulated like evidence in a case I didn't want to solve. Exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. Breasts tender enough to make putting on a shirt feel like warfare. A sensitivity to smells that turned my morning coffee from comfort to enemy. I lasted 4 days before panic drove me to the pharmacy. The pregnancy test felt like holding dynamite with a lit fuse. I stared at the box, pink and cheerful and absolutely terrifying, while a teenage cashier with purple hair rang up my purchase with the bored efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. Good luck, she said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Back home, I locked myself in the guest bathroom on the first floor, as far from Grayson's office as possible. The instructions were simple enough, but my hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to tear open the foil wrapper. 2 minutes. That's all it took for my world to shift on its axis. 2 pink lines. Clear as accusations, bright as blood. I sat on the bathroom floor and stared at the test until the lines blurred together. This was impossible. The doctors had been clear. My reproductive system was damaged, probably permanently. Stress-induced amenorrhea, they'd called it. A fancy way of saying my body had given up on the idea of creating life. Yet here was proof that my body had been keeping secrets. Pregnant. The word echoed off the bathroom tiles like a prayer to a god who'd stopped listening years ago. Charlie scratched at the door, sensing distress with the uncanny intuition that seemed to govern his every action. I let him in, and he immediately pressed against my legs, warm and solid and somehow knowing. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked him, holding up the test like evidence of a crime I hadn't meant to commit. He tilted his head and whined softly, then did something strange. He walked to the bathroom door and back to me, then repeated the action, as if he were trying to lead me somewhere. Not now, boy. I need to think. But thinking felt impossible when my entire reality had just reorganized itself around 2 pink lines. I was pregnant with the child of a man who looked at me like a stranger. A man who'd bought me like a commodity to solve his family's problems. A man whose hands I'd once loved, whose voice had whispered promises in the dark before everything vanished like smoke. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, I found Grayson in the kitchen, reading something on his phone with the focused intensity that meant business crisis. He looked up when I entered, and something in my expression made him set the device down. Everything all right? Fine. The lie tasted like copper pennies and old shame. Just tired. He studied my face with those winter gray eyes, and for a moment I thought he might push further. But he simply nodded and returned to his phone. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Charlie snored softly on the rug. The pregnancy test was hidden in my nightstand drawer, wrapped in tissue paper like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. Somewhere in this house, Grayson was probably working late, reviewing contracts or planning corporate takeovers, or whatever it was that billionaire alphas did when they couldn't sleep. Did he ever think about the past? Did he remember the boy I'd been? Or had he filed those memories away with all the other inconvenient emotions that might interfere with business? I pressed my hand to my stomach, still flat, but now carrying the weight of possibility. In there, cells were dividing and growing, creating something that was half me and half the man who'd broken my heart so thoroughly I'd forgotten how to trust love. The baby would need a father. More than that, it deserved parents who could at least pretend to care about each other. But how do you build a family on the ruins of a love story that ended before it began? Charlie lifted his head and looked at me with those amber eyes, as if he could read the questions spinning through my mind. Then he stood, walked to the bedroom door, and sat facing it with the patience of a creature who knew that some secrets couldn't stay buried forever. The headache started during breakfast and built like a storm gathering strength over water. By noon, pain was driving spikes through my skull with the methodical precision of a construction crew. I retreated to the studio, hoping familiar motions might ease the pressure, but every brushstroke sent lightning through my temples. Charlie followed me upstairs, padding across the hardwood with unusual urgency. He positioned himself by the closet where I'd hidden the notebooks, whining with increasing distress. "Not now, boy." I pressed my palms against my eyes until stars bloomed behind my lids. I can't deal with mysteries today. But the pain was making me reckless. Or maybe it was the pregnancy hormones, stripping away the careful barriers I'd built around dangerous questions. When Charlie began scratching at the closet door, I finally gave in. The notebooks were exactly where I'd left them, wrapped in tissue paper like evidence of a crime. I pulled out the first one and opened it to a random page. Day 45. The morning sickness is getting worse. G brought me crackers and ginger tea. He says the nausea usually peaks around 8 weeks. How does he know that? The words hit me like ice water. Morning sickness. 8 weeks. I flipped through more pages, finding entry after entry documenting a pregnancy I didn't remember having. Day 67. First ultrasound today. The baby is perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong heartbeat. G cried when he heard it. I've never seen him cry before. My hands began to shake. The entries were in my handwriting, detailed and intimate, and absolutely impossible. Yet here they were, documenting months of a life I'd never lived. Day 89. Charlie keeps trying to curl up on my stomach. Dogs can sense these things, G says. Charlie knows about the baby, even though we haven't told anyone else. Charlie, the dog that had appeared at our gate like a ghost from a past I couldn't remember. I looked down at him now, and he was staring at me with those amber eyes filled with something that looked terrifyingly like recognition. As if he'd been waiting for this moment, for me to finally see what had been hidden in plain sight. Jesus Christ. The words came out as a whisper. You were here before. You remember. The headache intensified, driving spears of agony through my skull. But with the pain came something else, fragments of memory breaking through like sunlight through storm clouds. Yellow walls in a kitchen I'd never seen but somehow knew. The weight of pregnancy, round and heavy and wanted. Grayson's voice, younger and softer than it was now, reading pregnancy books aloud while I painted. His hands on my belly, feeling for kicks. His face when the ultrasound tech pointed out tiny fingers and toes. Love. Pure and overwhelming and absolutely real. The memories came faster now, a dam bursting under pressure too long contained. But they were wrong, fractured, like puzzle pieces that had been forced into the wrong configuration. A hospital room. Doctors with serious faces. My parents, grim and determined. Words like procedure, and for your own good, and you'll thank us later. Grayson fighting to reach me. Security guards holding him back. His voice desperate and breaking. You can't do this to him. He's pregnant. Darkness. Chemicals flooding my system. The sound of my own heartbeat slowing, until everything went black. I dropped the notebook like it had caught fire. The room spun around me, reality tilting on its axis, as the truth finally broke through the barriers my parents had built in my mind. They'd erased me. Not just the memories, they'd erased an entire pregnancy, an entire relationship, months of love and hope and growing life. They'd made me forget that I'd carried Grayson's child, that we'd planned a future together, that he'd fought to save us both. No. The word came out as a sob. No. But the memories kept coming, relentless as floodwater. I remembered the medical procedure that had prevented future pregnancies. Except it hadn't prevented anything. It had terminated the pregnancy I'd already had and blocked my memory of losing it. The baby we'd made together. Gone. Charlie pressed against my legs, warm and solid and heartbreakingly familiar. He'd been our dog. Mine and Grayson's. He'd slept beside our bed and guarded my growing belly and disappeared the day my parents dragged me away for treatment. They made me forget. The words tasted like blood and betrayal. They made me forget everything. The studio door opened behind me. I turned to find Grayson standing in the doorway, his face white with something that might have been hope or terror. You remember. His voice came out hoarse, as if he'd been waiting years to say those words. We lost our baby because of them. The truth settled in the space between us like a weight we'd both been carrying. I know. He stepped into the room slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. I've been trying to find a way to restore your memories without traumatizing you further. The doctors said forcing the recollection could cause permanent damage. So you married me instead. I married you because it was the only way to bring you home. His composure finally cracked, revealing the grief he'd been carrying like a stone in his chest. Because I've spent 2 years searching for a way to undo what they did to you. To us. Charlie whined softly, looking between us with the patience of a creature who'd been waiting for this reunion far longer than either of us realized. Outside, storm clouds gathered like omens, and I finally understood why this house had felt like a memory palace built from dreams. Because it was. Because I'd lived here before, loved here before, lost everything here before. And now I was pregnant again, carrying new life in a body that remembered the weight of loss. The silence stretched between us like a wound that wouldn't close. I sat on the studio floor with Charlie pressed against my side, fragments of a stolen life scattered around me in the form of notebooks I'd written but couldn't remember writing. Grayson stood in the doorway like a man afraid to cross a threshold that might shatter what little progress we'd made. How long have you known? My voice came out steadier than I felt. That your memories were gone? He moved into the room slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. The day you disappeared. I went to your parents' house to find you, and your mother told me you'd never heard my name before. 2 years. The timeline was starting to make sense in the worst possible way. You've been planning this marriage for 2 years. I've been planning to get you back for 2 years. The distinction mattered to him, even if it felt meaningless to me. The marriage was just the vehicle. Your parents' debts gave me leverage. I laughed, and the sound was sharp enough to cut glass. So you bought me. Like a commodity. Like property. I saved you. His voice carried an edge of desperation that made Charlie's ears perk up. Do you know what your life was like before this? You were living in a studio apartment the size of this closet, working 3 jobs to pay for art supplies you couldn't afford. Your parents had cut you off completely after you refused 2 previous arranged marriages. That was my choice. Was it? He knelt down beside me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. Or was it the choice of someone whose ability to form meaningful connections had been surgically removed? The question hit like a physical blow. I thought about the past 2 years, the isolation, the inability to trust anyone enough to let them close, the relationships that had started with promise but withered under the weight of something I couldn't name. The procedure didn't just erase our relationship, Grayson continued. It damaged your capacity for attachment. The doctors warned your parents, but they decided the risk was acceptable. And you decided I needed to be rescued. I decided you deserved to know the truth. His hand moved toward mine, then stopped just short of contact. I decided our child deserved to be remembered. Our child. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood about loss and love and the space between them. Tell me about the baby. The request came out smaller than intended. Grayson's face transformed, grief and joy warring for dominance. A boy. We were going to name him Oliver, after your grandfather. You felt him kick for the first time during a thunderstorm, scared the hell out of Charlie. I looked down at the dog, who was watching our conversation with the intensity of someone following a tennis match. He whined softly when he heard his name, tail thumping once against the floor. You were 19 weeks along when they took you. Grayson's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, far enough that we'd started buying furniture for the nursery. You'd painted an entire wall with characters from children's books. Where is it? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. The nursery. Basement level. I locked it up after. I couldn't bear to dismantle it, but I couldn't stand to look at it either. The locked room. Of course. I'd been living above my own grief for months without knowing it. I want to see it. Callum. I want to see our son's room. The words came out with enough force to make Charlie flinch. You brought me back here to remember. So let me remember. Grayson studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but if it becomes too much, then I'll deal with it. I stood up, legs unsteady but determination solid as steel. I've been dealing with the ghost of grief I couldn't name for 2 years. At least now I know what I'm mourning. He led me downstairs through hallways that felt more familiar with each step, Charlie padding behind us like a faithful witness. The basement door was plain wood painted white, secured with a deadbolt that looked like it hadn't been opened in months. Grayson's hands shook as he turned the key. The room beyond was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing I was prepared for. A crib with white slats and a mobile of hand-painted animals. A rocking chair positioned to catch the light from a small window. Walls covered in murals of storybook characters. Peter Rabbit and Winnie the Pooh and the Very Hungry Caterpillar. My work. Every brushstroke familiar now, muscle memory older than the conscious mind. I pressed my hand to my mouth, but it couldn't hold back the sob that followed. Charlie walked to the crib and sat beside it, looking up at us with eyes that held the weight of vigil. He'd been waiting here too, guarding the memory of what we'd lost. This is why you could never let me go, I said finally. This is why I had to find a way to bring you home. The morning sun painted everything gold when I woke up in Grayson's arms. 3 weeks had passed since the truth broke through like water through a cracked dam. 3 weeks of fragments becoming memories, of learning to trust the man I'd been taught to hate. I turned in his embrace, studying the face that had haunted my dreams for years. In sleep, the corporate mask disappeared, revealing the boy I'd loved at 17. The man I was choosing to love again at 26. Good morning. His voice carried the rough edges of sleep and something softer, contentment, maybe, or hope. Morning. I pressed my hand to the small bump that was just beginning to show. We should tell him today. Tell who what? Charlie. About the baby. Grayson laughed, the sound warm against my neck. I think he already knows. He's been following you around like a bodyguard for weeks. As if summoned by his name, Charlie appeared in the doorway, tail wagging with the kind of joy that suggested he'd been waiting for us to wake up. He trotted over to the bed and rested his chin on the mattress, amber eyes bright with intelligence. Hey boy. I reached down to scratch his ears. Want to hear a secret? Charlie's tail moved faster, as if he understood that good news was coming. We're having a baby. The words felt easier each time I said them. You're going to be a big brother. Charlie's entire body wiggled with excitement. He jumped up, front paws on the bed. Then he looked at Grayson with something that looked remarkably like approval. I think he's happy about it, Grayson said, voice thick with emotion. We all are. The words surprised me with their truth. After weeks of fear and confusion, happiness had crept in like sunrise, gradual, then sudden, then impossible to ignore. Are you sure? Grayson's hand covered mine on my belly. About all of this. About us. I thought about the question seriously. The memories of our first love were still tender, like a bone that had healed but ached in cold weather. The lost pregnancy would always be a shadow between us, grief that had grown into the shape of missing. But grief wasn't the only thing we shared. We had Charlie, who'd somehow found his way back to us when we needed him most. We had this house that held our history. We had the life growing inside me. Proof that love could survive even surgical erasure. I'm sure. I turned to face him fully. I choose this. I choose you. Not because I was forced to, but because I want to. Even though it won't be easy, especially because it won't be easy. He kissed me then, soft and careful and full of promise. Charlie barked once, as if to say he approved of this development. When we finally made it downstairs for breakfast, I found myself moving through the kitchen with the confidence of belonging. The yellow walls I'd painted during my forgotten months here seemed brighter now, welcoming rather than mysterious. I want to convert the spare room upstairs into a nursery, I said as Grayson poured coffee. Something new. Just for this baby. Not the basement room. That room belongs to Oliver. This baby needs his own space. Grayson nodded, understanding without explanation. Some grief you carried forward, but new love needed room to grow. I'll call the contractors tomorrow. We'll call them together. Charlie settled at my feet under the breakfast table, warm and solid and somehow knowing. Outside, spring was beginning to show itself in early buds and longer days. Inside, we were building something that felt remarkably like hope. The baby would arrive in the fall, when leaves turned gold, and the world prepared for winter. But we would be ready with love that had been tested and chosen, with a dog who remembered everything important, and with the knowledge that some stories get second chances. I reached across the table and took Grayson's hand. "I love you," I said, and meant it in a way that was both remembering and deciding. "I love you too." His fingers tightened around mine. "Both of you." Charlie wagged his tail, and the morning light made everything shine. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next video.